Wall Street, or at least big tech, or at least Jim Cramer is salivating at the possibility of a Kamala Harris administration. We're going to talk to Washington Post Jeff Stein about that in one moment. First, I want to play a little clip from CNBC, Jim Cramer. Let's take a look at his reaction to Kamala's rise.
A few weeks here, Jim.
These are very different people. Biden has been and remains unsophisticated about the way business works, unsophisticated about the stock market by nature. Picks people who have been historically bad for Wall Street, Lena Khan, Jonathan Cantor, Antitrust. That ends entirely. You've got a person who's from California. I'm regarding this actually as mega versus MAGA. Mega tech does better with someone who's sophisticated, who understands California, who is not against tech. Biden has done everything in these agencies that he can to annoy, to go after tech. Let's not forget, her brother-in-law is Tony West, who is a former general counsel of PepsiCo, then was with the Justice Department, is now the general counsel of Uber. And you tell me if there's someone who's more sophisticated and knows more about business and the West Coast than her brother-in-law, who would be an amazing advisor. They're close. And I just keep thinking this is going to be globalist versus nativist, not nationalist, nativist.
Yes.
Populist in terms of the Republican Party versus pro-business versus the Democrat, international business. These are very big differences, and I have followed her career and followed Biden's career. And if anybody, Biden didn't hurt the stock market at all. It's pretty amazing how well the Biden administration's done. But this whole idea that she's a clone of his is completely wrong.
All right, Jeff Stein from the Washington Post joining us now. It says, Jeff, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, always glad to be on. Thanks, Ryan.
So there's a lot to tease apart when it comes to Kamala Harris's economic record. But let's start here with antitrust. You've got Jim Cramer of CNBC, who, luckily for us, perhaps, is almost always wrong about everything.
There's two ways you can read those comments.
So he's forecasting that if Harris were reelected, that he would fire Lena Khan, the FTC chair, and fire Jonathan Cantor, who runs the antitrust division in the Department of Justice, big foes of big business. He's not basing that on any facts. He's asserting it, but he's asserting it based on the connections that she has and the kind of ideas that she's put forward before. So it's not completely idle speculation or absurd at all. So starting on antitrust, and then we can move on to other things. What is your read on where Kamala Harris is on antitrust, and do you think that some of Biden's best appointees, Cantor and Khan, would be on her chopping block?
I mean, Jim Cramer, I know you were talking about this in what you just said, but he also predicted that Biden had no chance of dropping out of the race. I think there is a lot of questions, and totally legitimate questions, that you're referring to. I mean, Tony West, Harris's ties to California, Silicon Valley elites, those are very real, but I would be really surprised if a Harris presidency significantly retreated from the Biden antitrust policy. It is true that Harris has ties to these elites that are, you would assume to be dispositionally opposed to what Biden has done on antitrust. Not just Tony West, but David Plouffe is now rumored to be back in the mix. Her husband is a white-collar attorney, defense attorney. So there is a lot there, but I think it's worth pointing out that, Ryan, you and I were looking at the people close to President Biden at the beginning of the administration, and there were a ton of BlackRock or Blackstone or, you name it, former Uber executives, Steve Ricchetti and Bruce Reed and Donnellan, all these old Biden hands that seemed so fundamentally entrenched in the sort of Clintonite era, the Clintonite wing of the party, people who had done welfare reform that that the left and others would find highly objectionable, that then were quite avid advocates of expansions of the welfare state. Obviously, those weren't approved. But I think it's clear that Harris, is signaling to the business community. The business leaders I've talked to have said, yes, we're trying to get better vibes from the Harris administration, but I think it's too early to say, unfortunately, who's playing who here. And I would not be surprised at all if Harris, her record is really thin. Like, she hasn't had an executive position for very long. So we really just don't know which way she's going to go. She is also, I would say, just incredibly close with the labor unions, SEIU in particular. We can get into that. But her political coalition, her political allies, it's complicated in the way that I think Biden's were complicated, where you do have these people with really corporate resumes who end up appointing people like Lina Khan, who the antitrust community is really happy to see.
How did Lina Khan end up in that position? Because I think that tells us something about, what we might be able to expect from a Kamala Harris. I mean, Joe Biden was no anti-corporate lawyer. He was known as the senator from MBNA because of his tight, relationships and willingness to do the bidding of the credit card issuers in his home state. He had a terrible track record on these issues, frankly. And then when he comes into office, you get these great appointments and a real shift. So is that reflective of just a shift in the center of gravity on these issues? Was it like because of Ron Klain? I mean, where did that come from?
I guess you could get the Matt Stoller answer or the Matt Brunig answer, the two schools of thought on this question. The Matt Stoller answer obviously would be sort of what you first alluded to, that the Democratic Party has shifted considerably enough that this was sort of an important thing for Biden to fulfill to an important part of his base. I think the more cynical answer is that antitrust at the levels that it's being pursued in Washington, while maybe sort of important for business formation and getting more competition in the market, is still kind of a solution that businesses want to see, right? Like, this is the Matt Brunig answer, that antitrust reform and antitrust legislation is kind of popular in Washington and has legs in Washington because it can be underwritten and supported by huge businesses. If you're like a second or third tier business, you're still not a worker, you're still not someone who needs welfare benefits. You're actually often a very powerful entity, not someone we would think of as sort of a vulnerable, disempowered citizen. And so in Washington, there is a ton of money behind the antitrust community, which I think is counterintuitive to people on the left who may think of antitrust and may be right that antitrust is this important anti-monopoly tool, but it really, going back to the early 1900s, it's also been successful in part because there are powerful business interests behind who want to have more competition, who want to themselves grow their market share. But that doesn't mean that they're necessarily small mom and pop shops. It could just mean that they're not the biggest players. So I think Harris's legacy, or sort of what she would do on this, is very interesting. I mean, I think it's quite clear that Donald Trump would be a lot worse on antitrust issues. His regulatory appointments to the FTC and elsewhere showed very little interest, with the important exception, I think, of tech, where you saw some actions on Google and some other big firms that Republicans and conservatives think are discriminating against them. Other than that, Trump had really took a light touch with regulation in general, including on antitrust.
And the other layer of an answer to that question on a tactical level is that Elizabeth Warren made it a huge priority of hers to get Lina Khan and Jonathan Kanter into those positions. And there was also a kind of parallel campaign in Washington that was, I think, orchestrated by a lot of the people that you're talking about to basically eliminate all of the other competition for the job. And they were easy to eliminate, and we did a bunch of reporting on each one of these candidates that was floated to be either FTC chair or antitrust chair, basically, of the Department of Justice, and pointed out all of their conflicts of interest with big tech. Like, so the big tech and other big business elements that wanted kind of pro-trust candidates to get through had the problem that all of the lawyers that they wanted in that position had done very recent work with very unpopular monopolies. And all you had to do was kind of point out that they had done this work, and then they would be kind of taken off the list. And if you notice, Kanter and Khan were among the latest kind of appointments made. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't as if Biden kind of leaped at the opportunity to fulfill this pledge. He kind of tried to do everything else first and wasn't able to, and then finally was like, you know what? All right, these are the two left standing, and Elizabeth Warren really wants this to happen, and there's this whole, like you said, organized movement that is well funded behind it. So let's go ahead and do that. So that, to me, suggests, I'm curious for your take on this, that the same thing could happen in a Kamala Harris administration. And we can put up this Li Fang element, this next element here, because this goes to this exact point. She doesn't really have much of an ideology. She has, as Li Fang points out, she's been a tough on crime prosecutor. She's been a criminal justice reformer. She's been tough on the banks. She's been weak on the banks. Like whatever is like opportune at the moment, she's willing to do. So I think with the right pressure campaign, you could imagine that she could be dragged to the same position Biden was dragged to. What's your sense?
I really like that frame for the lead piece, and I have been trying to figure out what the hell I'm going to write this week. So I think
I'm looking forward to your piece.
Yeah, it's really the moment. Or it's like you have Marxist academics being like sharing coconut memes and being like, actually, maybe because of her dad and her mom and whatever, that there's like latent Marxist tendencies. And then Mark Cuban is telling Politico, like, we have an ally here. And there's this like moment of good vibes among Democrats, and that seems to have like filtered out to even like not the blue MAGA loyalist types, like people on the left and right of the party are sort of, after all of the depression that people on the left felt with the Biden era and his verbal lapses, there's now this moment where like people are hoping that there's some change, that Harris represents what they want to see. And I think the reality of politics, not to be like too big of a bummer for people who are hoping to see in her something different, the reality of politics is that all these people can't be right. At some point, the unions or the business community is going to be disappointed. How long she can do this thing where she's sort of allowing people to see in her what they want to see, I guess we'll have to wait. I get the sense, I would say the one thing that I have felt pretty strongly about from my reporting is that she does seem to care quite deeply about what we would call like the care economy set of issues. I don't know if we want to get into this, but
yeah,
paid
go ahead.
family leave, child care, elder care, home care. These are things that, the Biden administration tried to pass. It failed as part of the Build Back Better agenda due to Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. But what is interesting to me about that is that Harris, as a Black woman, has formed for decades a very, very close political alliance with the kind of unions that Biden has traditionally been weaker among, including sort of the service worker unions, which are more heavily composed of immigrants and people of color and women in particular, relative to the building trades in the Midwest that you see particularly, the National American Building Trades Union and the Teamsters, like those kinds of unions that are sort of doing construction and manufacturing. Biden had a very strong in with them. It's not clear if Harris is that strong, but it seemed like her base but also concurrently the policy issue space that she's very invested in and very interested in taking up. Again, who knows, maybe she gets into office and does something completely different. But the reporting I've done suggests that she is deeply invested in that set of issues. And she spent a lot of time talking to caregivers, talking to SEIU representatives, talking to the people who would benefit from those kinds of investments that were a noticeable failure in the first Biden administration.
And so does it follow then that you would expect a sort of similar orientation of like the National Labor Relations Board under Kamala Harris? Has she been consistent? Because, part of what Li Fang's piece brings out is a lot of times when she was elected and, statewide in California or prosecutor DA in California, she was more conservative, more on the right, and then she reforms herself in the Senate, and she reforms herself again to be more progressive because she thinks that's the lane that's open to her in the 2020 primary. So a lot of what you think of Kamala Harris depends on what era of her politics that you're looking at. And as vice president, she's just sort of wholly undefined because she's been on the on the outskirts of that administration. It's not her policy, it's the Biden policy. You really can't say anything about her vis-a-vis what she has done with Joe Biden. But, do you see a consistent thread from the California time to the Senate time to the presidential time in terms of her support for labor?
Yes, I think she has clearly from very early on cultivated that set of unions. And I don't know if that suggests that she'll be good on criminal justice reform from a left perspective or foreign policy, but I do think, I feel very convinced that particularly for the service workers, she's quite dug in on doing what it takes to help them as they've helped her move up, not just to the vice presidency, but, in earlier stages of her career when she was running for office in California. I will just say on this broader topic we're discussing, I'm torn, right? Because part of me feels like Biden had all of these votes that, your listeners and the viewers will be familiar with, for the Iraq War and to deregulate Wall Street and you guys know the list, credit card and student debt, changes that made it more difficult for people to declare bankruptcy and discharge their debt, all these changes that suggest that Biden was really on the corporate wing of the party. And then in office, he did a lot of things that I think we all recognize were more left-wing than we were expecting. I mean, $300 billion in student debt forgiveness, obviously struck down by the courts, but I think that it's fair to say that they've continued fighting for that. Obviously, there's a lot of frustration with Gaza and criticism of Biden over that. But Biden, at least, I think, in part because he was so centrist in disposition, an old white man who people saw as a centrist, was kind of able to make things that otherwise would seem more liberal, give them sort of a centrist veneer, like the Midas touch where things became centrist when Biden did them. I know a lot of people disagree with that, but I think there's something to it. And I wonder if Harris could have the opposite thing, the thing we saw under Obama, where because she's a Black woman, because of her identity, and because her political fear is not the same as Biden's was so afraid of losing the progressive base that he was very solicitous of them. If Harris's identity sort of reduces the need for her politically to assure that part of the party, maybe she will tack center in her policy implementation of this position. I'm not sure what you guys think of that thought, but
I think, it's probably true that centrist policies from her will be coded as left-wing like they were under Obama. And Biden can push, pretty far to the left end of the possible spectrum from what a president can do, and still be coded centrist because he's Biden. I think that's a kind of irrefutable point, and it doesn't bode well for her ability to kind of govern. Unlikely she'll have a Congress to do much of that with. So maybe that won't be a problem for her anyway.
Yeah, well, that's true. But of course, there's still plenty that can be done at the executive level. And as Lina Khan and Jonathan Cantor have shown, with the appointments mattering quite a bit. Jeff Stein, always great to have your insights and your reporting. It's astonishing, honestly, how many years has Kamala Harris been in public office? That we
about as many
can't.
as have been coming on the show, honestly.
We can't answer really the most basic questions about who she is. And I think it'll be interesting to see how she positions herself, because it'll answer some of these questions about whether it is about the person and their ideology, or how they're perceived and how much bandwidth that gives them to do, quote unquote, liberal things. Or is it that there's a different moment that is truly moving past the, Reagan, Clinton, Obama, neoliberal era, where it's just you stick any normie Democrat in there and they're going to be pro-antitrust and they're going to be pro-labor, et cetera. So it'll be fascinating to watch how all of this unfolds.
I'd edit that to say we do have an answer to the question. We do know who she is. It's just not a satisfying answer. She's just a politician who's going to do what
convenient.
she thinks is like beneficial that day.
True. Yeah. Very true. Jeff, thank you so much. So great to see you.
Hey, my pleasure, guys. Thanks again.
Yeah, our pleasure. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. Ryan and Emily will be here for a fantastic Counterpoints tomorrow, and Sagar will be back on Thursday. So our long-awaited Sagar reaction to all of the events of this week.
Can't wait. I'm going to watch.
I'm sure no one is more excited about being back here to share all of his thoughts on Sagar. So Ryan will see you tomorrow, and I will see you on Thursday. Bye, y'all.
See you guys tomorrow.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.